All right, what I like to do when I start up a new project is as soon as I've created my new level, the level that I'm going to be kind of working in, I like to make sure that my editor opens up this level as soon as I start. That way, it's just going to save me one step. So if I go to Edit Project Settings and I go to Maps and Modes, this is where I can set my editor startup map, and I'll just set that to my Substrate sandbox. This game default map is if I'm going to be creating an executable of my levels. I'm not going to be doing that, but I like to just set it to something anyways, just in case I do create a standalone version of this game or viewer that I'm creating. All right, so now that that's set and I'm ready to go here, I've just imported in a static mesh of just the Unreal Material Sphere. This can be found in a number of different places. This is from the automotive content pack that Epic provides for learning from, and I just grabbed it from there. So I'm just going to drop a couple of these into my world, hold Alt and drag out just to duplicate them around, and I'm going to start building up my substrate material. Now, I thought it'd be interesting to create a kind of a diner chair material like this, where we have a kind of a very shiny kind of coat on top. I got some glittery effects kind of going underneath here, and I've got a few different kind of reflection lobes happening on this. If I kind of look at some other images here, I got some kind of dirt masks that I could be applying on this as well. So it seems like a pretty interesting kind of prop. Again, if you're looking to find a material to start practicing your substrate development skills on, this is going to be one that's going to work well. So I'm going to start off with this, and I'm going to come here into my substrate basic, and actually I'm going to just create a new material here. I'll leave this one here for now, but I'm going to create a new material here called M substrate, and I'll just call this stool. Okay, and I'm going to comprise this chair out of maybe like 3 materials. I'm going to have kind of a top layer. I'm going to have kind of the material or fabric inside, underneath that clear coat, and then I'm going to put the kind of the glints and the flakes underneath that material. I'm going to treat this similar to how we'd kind of treat a car paint, where we'd have kind of the kind of top layer of the clear coat go on. We'd have the layer of the paint underneath, and then we would have kind of the speckled, glint layer kind of happening underneath that. So I'm going to kind of approach this in this very similar way. So I'm going to just create the surface layer. I'm just going to call it surface, and I'm going to lay down a slab, and I'm just going to drop in a surface kind of albedo here. And I'm going to be working with the idea that I want to have some control over this after I've kind of built my master material. So I'm going to be creating my parameters as I go. One thing that we can do is, I can drop down a 3 vector by holding down 3 and then left clicking as I'm holding it down. And then I can promote this to a parameter by right clicking it. This is completely valid and reasonable thing to do. Another way that I could approach that is if I have a control over here, I can just promote one of these to a variable as well, and then name this what I want it to be named. That saves you a bit of a step. So I'm just going to kind of raise this up just a little bit. I'm going to maybe just put this something low, just as a default value. I'm going to give this material a roughness as well. So I'm going to promote this to a parameter, and I'm just going to label this as surface roughness. And maybe surface isn't a great word. I don't really know what to call it. Be vinyl maybe, but I'll just leave it with surface so that I know what I'm talking about. And then I also, I want this to be able to show the flakes layer that I'm going to put underneath this. So I'm going to make this have some, translucency to it. So the transmittance color that I like to work with is going to be much nicer than if I start just loading in kind of values into this SSS MFP and start working with kind of numbers to change the wavelength that is entering into it into a different wavelength. Instead of working kind of in a very convoluted way, we have some helper nodes that we can use. So the one that I'm going to use is a substrate transmittance to mean free path. And this way I can simply plug in a color value here, and it's going to run some code inside this node to be able to convert this into a mean free path. It's just going to be an artist friendly way for me to tint the color that gets that light is going to shine through. So I'm going to add in another 3 vector here, or I can simply promote this to a parameter, and I could call this surface transmission. Transmittance. There we go. And I'm just going to change this into a material color that might be kind of a bit of a reddish color. Then I'll plug this into the subsurface scattering mean free path. So with all of this done here, this is just going to be, again, my kind of thin layer of translucent material inside underneath the clear coat that is going to be the layer above kind of my flakes that I have. So I'm going to just plug this into my result node, which is then going to convert this into a substrate kind of result node, and I'm left with something like this. Right now, it's I'm not really going to see much of my material work because there's nothing underneath this layer to kind of show my transmittance or anything like that. But I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then I'm going to just take this layer right here, and I'm going to comment it, and I'm just going to call this, I'll call it middle surface, just so we can kind of understand the order of things. And when we're working with a bunch of slabs, and we're going to be kind of blending these with vertical layers, horizontal layers, etc., it can be a great idea, instead of having to kind of hook this all the way over here and that all the way over there, is just start using named reroute nodes. So what our named reroute node is going to do, so if I add a named reroute declaration, I can now call this what it is. This is going to be my surface slab. And now whenever I want to kind of drag out from like here, I don't need to anymore. I can simply say surface slab, grab that named reroute, and I can just plug this in where I need it to be plugged in. And so this is preventing me from having to have all these large kind of lines and arrows and things going across my graph. Cool. So with all of that done for my middle layer, I'm going to go ahead and create my bottom layer here, which is going to be my flakes layer. So I'm going to just find an empty space down here, and I'm going to drop down one more slab. And I'm going to treat these flakes as if they're kind of like, metallic, like very high, shiny flakes to kind of work with. So for my diffuse albedo, I'm going to go ahead and promote that to a parameter, and I'm just going to call this flakes albedo. And I'll give this I'm going to go ahead and just give this a kind of a bright red color. For my F0, I'm going to go ahead and promote this to a parameter, and I'm just going to call this flakes reflection. And I'm going to give this a very bright color. So I'm going to just maybe create this, maybe like a 0.97, somewhere in there. Just make these kind of flakes really bright. And if you want to kind of see this kind of build up as we go, we can just plug this into the result node, so we can kind of see what it's going to look like kind of as we're working on it. Next, I'm going to just drop in a roughness. So I'm going to call this flakes roughness. And this is going to start off with the default value. I'll just put it at 0.5 here. I'm going to also just activate my glints as well. And you'll notice here in my slabs I have glint density and glint UV, but it currently says that they're disabled. And this is because as of version 5.7, Unreal now has kind of two different G buffers that we can use, or two different buffers that we can use when we're working with Substrate. So if I go to my edit project settings, and if I just type in Substrate, you can see the types of settings that I have associated with this. And Substrate Materials is on by default, which is great, but they put the Substrate G buffer format to a blendable G buffer, which is great because it's going to be able to work with legacy workflows, as well as it's going to be a lot more performant. However, if I want to take advantage of all the cool bells and whistles that Substrate has to offer, I want to go ahead and just change this over to an adaptive G buffer. It is going to require a restart, so I can go ahead and do that. But before I do, I'm also going to turn on Substrate Opaque Material Rough Refraction. If I don't have this turned on, I'll have a hard time seeing some of the kind of results of my kind of roughness shading lobes that we're going to be creating in a little bit. Right now, my substrate bytes per pixel is set to 80. If you ever get a message down here that says, hey, you've run out of bytes, substrate has been simplified, and you start to notice your material doesn't look the way that you intend it to, you may need to kind of come in here and just increase this number a little bit. But I recommend not doing that until you really start noticing that those messages show up, and if you haven't been able to simplify your material to get rid of that, then you can increase it here. But I'll go ahead and restart this now and come back into that. And now that I've restarted, if I come back into my slab, I can see that I now have access to my glint density and my glint UVs. So I have the full toolkit of what Substrate materials have to offer now. So I'm going to go ahead and just put in a value here for my glint UVs and my glint density. I'll go ahead and just promote this to a parameter, and I'm going to call this flakes glint density, and I'm going to just go ahead and set my value to say 0.8, 0.6, somewhere in there. Then for my glint UVs, we have a couple of approaches. I can just throw in a typical kind of UV formula, such as using a texture coordinate, multiplying it by a value, and plugging that in. Or you can also put in a triplanar function in here as well. If your model doesn't have UVs on it, then you can create a triplanar function and plug that in as well, so that your glints don't have to rely on what your UVs are doing. But I'm going to just rely on what my UVs are doing by using this texture coordinate node multiplied by a scalar value. And normally I would say, set your multiplication value to 1 whenever you're multiplying something, so that it's the original value. But in this case, because we're working with kind of glints, we don't want it to be this big. I'm going to go ahead and just set my value quite a bit higher right off the bat. So that I can actually see what I'm working with. So I'll set my value to, maybe about 80 here seems like an appropriate amount. And I can always kind of adjust this later. So this was just a one constant that I laid down by holding down 1 and left clicking. So I need to convert this into a parameter, and so I will just call this flakes glint UV tiling. Terrific. Now, we do also have the ability to add in a secondary roughness to this as well. And this might be a nice effect for us to, um, just play with how the roughness of these flakes is actually reacting. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and just promote my secondary roughness to a parameter, and I'm going to just call this flakes secondary roughness, and I'll do the same thing with the weight. And this is going to determine how much of this secondary roughness should be showing through compared to the original roughness. And I'll go ahead and just set this to a base value of 0.5, and I'll set my secondary roughness weight to 0, just so that if I don't want that effect on by default, I'm not going to be seeing it. So I'm going to just call this flakes. Awesome. So with all of this, I can start to see my kind of glints showing up. This is kind of a effect that I'm looking for over here. So I'm just going to comment all this. I'm going to call this one my flakes. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did up here, and I'm going to just end it off with a named reroute node, so that it's going to make, when I'm using my blending operators, I'm going to be kind of less burdened by kind of all these lines going everywhere. So add a named reroute node, and I'm just going to call this flakes slab. Terrific. So I have flakes slab built. I have my kind of middle surface built. So now I kind of just want to combine these two things. And I'm going to combine these with a just a standard vertical layer. So with a vertical layer, it allows kind of just one coat. Oops. Vertical layer. So it allows one kind of slab to coat another slab. So the top material here does need to be transmissive in order for light to kind of reach the coated slab underneath. So that's why over here in this kind of middle surface, I added in my surface transmittance, and I said that yes, light is allowed to kind of pass through this material, which is then going to show my bottom layer, my flakes down here. So a vertical layer does need to have the materials be transmissive. So the MFP and the thickness are going to be kind of the primary kind of parameters to kind of tune this when we're using vertical layering. So I'm going to put in my surface slab on top. I'm going to go ahead and put in my flakes slab on the bottom. And then for my thickness, this is where I'm going to just add in kind of my surface thickness here. So I'm going to just promote this to a parameter as well. And I'm going to call this surface thickness. And I'm going to give this a value of maybe 0.01 and see how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and add those two things together. And now I'm kind of left with this material here. If I start applying this onto some of these models, we can start to see with what we're looking at or working with. So I'm going to just drop this onto here. Cool. So this is great. I can start to see kind of that effect kind of working here. I have the kind of surface transmittance layer being shining through onto my flakes layer. And if I promote this to a parameter, sorry, if I promote this to a material instance, I'm going to have access to all the parameters that I've set up here. Now I realize I didn't add these to groups, so I'm going to just quickly do that before I create my material instance. So I'm just going to grab all these parameters in my flakes, and I'm just going to put this as a flakes group, and I've labeled it 3 just because I know that this is going to be the bottom layer, my surface is going to be the mid layer, and I'm going to have a clear coat on top of this, which is going to be kind of the top layer. So I already know how many kind of layers this is going to have. So that's how I'm going to label it, layer it here. And maybe actually I want to go the opposite direction, so maybe I'll just rename these. And I'll just call this 01 flakes to signify that's at the bottom, in case I want to add a dirt layer on the top of my clear coat, for example. So I'll grab these ones here and I'll add this into a middle surface group. And I'll hit save. Cool. And now when I create a material instance for this, I'm going to just call this MI Diner Stool. I'm going to assign this over here. I like to just hit a save all as soon as I create a new material, just so it writes it into my project onto my disk. And now when I bring this over here, I can see that I have my controls. It looks like I missed one. Oh, this would be the surface thickness. And now I can start kind of controlling things like my glint density, how much of this glint should be showing through. I have my glint tiling, which again is using the UVs of the actual object itself. So as I kind of spin this, you can see where my UV seams are, which is where it might be useful using a triplanar projection for this. Even though it's such a random material, it's probably going to be a bit hard to see just in the first place. And the interesting thing with the flakes layer is the higher your roughness goes, the more kind of glints are going to show up, and the lower you go, the more it's going to be isolated around where your highlight is, which is again an interesting kind of effect here that you can just use your artist's eye to see what kind of works well. Cool. So I like what's going on here. If I want to kind of adjust kind of the color and intensity of where this mid layer is kind of showing up, I have my albedo channels, I have my roughness going on here for this kind of top layer. But this is going to be kind of just the kind of thin layer of film that is going to sit over top of my flakes layer. I actually want to add on a clear coat, kind of a top layer on top of this. Think of it like when we're looking at that picture of the kind of lacquered wood, where I had kind of like an epoxy or like a layer on top of the material, and that is going to have its own kind of reflection associated with it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just set my surface roughness back to 0 here, and I'm going to go ahead and start building up my top layer and start building up some of the kind of additional properties such as scratches or smudges and things on top of this layer now that it's built up.